So here we are, everyone. Welcome to episode 4, season 3. And today I'm here with Serena, obviously, my amazing wing woman. And we're talking about the subject of resilience. So resilience is something that I've had to dig into quite a bit recently with a flight that was cancelled coming back from Gran Canaria a couple of weeks ago, and then having to deal with Dad's birthday and all of that stuff. Family stuff always really makes me dig deep into resilience. But I thought it would be good just to start with a definition of resilience. So for me, and I'll come to you in a minute, Serena, for me, resilience is all around mental and emotional and physical capacity. The capacity that we have, like our bandwidth that we have, it feels sometimes quite like an energetic thing, to bounce back from setbacks, to bounce back from plot twists, to bounce back from, mini traumas, big traumas, little traumas. And I think that dysregulation in the face of plot twists or setbacks or whatever is normal, but how we bounce back from them is probably denotes our levels of resilience. Would you agree, or would you have anything to add to that? What do you think?
Well, first of all, hello, Sally. Thank you for a really thorough introduction there to today and another very important topic. Yeah, I mean, anyone, as we've established over the course of the pod, can go and Google a definition of what resilience is. And I looked at some of those definitions, if you like, just to see what my thoughts were about what I was reading. And I think some of the key words that come up for me are recovery, adjustment, and for me, and I've said this so many times before, is that sense of being agile. So to be able to recover from something that has maybe been difficult or challenging, something to be said for how you adjust then around that, so that recovery and that adjustment. But for me, that is very much based on your agility, which is part of that resilience. So there's some really kind of important themes coming into what it might mean to you to be resilient. And again, something I'm always really passionate about when we're looking at defining something is that you're clear on what your definition of that might be, so we can talk about what resilience is. And so I would really encourage people, as we're speaking to what resilience looks like, that people think and reflect about how that sits in their own body, how that resonates in their own life. So there is a definition, and we kind of come to it slightly differently. For
Those
to reflect.
It is, self-reflect on what it means to you. I think that is always so important, because there are multiple definitions and there are many, many different ways that we can see the same thing. And it is really important how it is to you. So are there any events that you can call to mind where you have had to dig into any resilience?
I knew you were going to ask me that. And I haven't come with
Just
that
your whole life, basically.
Feels like it at the moment. I can't lie. It's interesting what you said about family. I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because I think a lot of us, and people listening to us speak on the podcast, I think just that word family in and of itself feels like the word resilience is at the very forefront of our minds when we think about family. There'll be some people that don't really have that reaction to the word, but so many of us, myself included, I do have to, that resilience is there, and it's a part of my family dynamic is to have that resilience. I was raised to be resilient.
Yeah.
I was raised to problem solve.
Yeah.
Very much like women of our time.
Yeah.
I think. Are we Generation X? I never remember.
We are Generation X, yeah.
Yeah, we're a resilient generation. I mean, we could go down a complete rabbit hole with that one. We were the kids, the generation that were told, kind of go and play on the road.
Right.
Yeah. My parents didn't have a skivvy-doo what I was doing at school. I was just told to do well, or else.
And
So
we had to problem solve, didn't we? Like that was basically
yeah,
think for yourself. Like you get your own self out of a hole. Don't
yeah, you
expect too much. Don't expect too much, wrapping up in cotton wool or
100%.
pandering to. It's like you think for yourself. And actually I think that stands us in good stead. I think you can definitely have too much coddling, and it's not great for problem solving or creativity,
Well,
for
it goes
sure.
back to how do you build resilience? And I think arguably there, I mean, with all of these things, you could say that there's a sweet spot. I think possibly a lot of our generation, our families, one end of the spectrum. It was like literally don't know what you're up to. It just kind of enforced rules for the sake of them. Be back at this time. You can't do that, or you can do that. Um, like I said, just being told to do well, but not being shown how necessarily. So you're forced to problem solve things on your own, but it's a very hands off way of parenting.
Yeah.
I can't speak for everyone. There'll be people listening to this that don't have that experience of their family, and there'll be people now that have that experience of their family. I just think it's very resonant of our time, and particularly, I think the women that I've worked with over the years are coming to mind. Women of our age seem to have that hard wiring to figure out everything on their own. And I
Yeah.
think it does come from that kind of parenting, which is a very much a hands off. Whereas now you seem to see people go completely the other way, where, as you mentioned the word coddling, where all the problem solving, it's something we've talked about before, but all
Hmm.
the problem solving seems to be taken away from a child. And that way you've gone completely the other end of the spectrum. And going back to that idea of resilience, how do we build resilience? Well, we need some problems to deal with to be able to know how we adjust, how we adapt.
Yeah, suffering is actually quite an essential thing, in order to build certain fortitude, a certain capacity within us. That's how we develop capacity, isn't it? That's how we develop that sense of strength, that problem solving ability. Too much of it, and then you become traumatized and you go the other way, and then you just constantly, having those PTSD moments or whatever, and that actually doesn't have this has a detrimental effect. So it's striking a balance, and perhaps we've sort of bounced the other way now today, and we've gone too much into the coddling. And I think over the next few years, what we might be seeing is more of a balance, hopefully, anyway.
There was I need to find, if anyone listening can remind me of the amazing academic that said this, but there was an academic, I think, I want to say she was an admissions tutor for Stanford, maybe. It was an American university, and she was quite outspoken about leaving her role because what she was finding was she was having increasing difficulty dealing with excuse me, the parents of the children coming into the university.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the parents, she said, who, and please tell me who this was, if you're listening, email us or message us, because I don't want to not credit her because it's her
Yeah.
story. But she talked about just the increasing pressure from parents every year, contacting admissions, wanting to know the details of the courses for their children that were entering the university. So they wanted the syllabuses, they wanted the reading lists. And there were even parents who were wanting to go out onto things like European field trips to do the field trip before their kids did it, so they can almost risk assess the trip.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so she said that it was just becoming so unbearable dealing with that kind of level of pressure from parents. And just what is that doing for our children? How is that
Mm.
building them to be strong, capable, resilient young adults in the world today? And
Yeah.
the fact is it's not, because
Yeah.
you're taking all of that beautiful learning away from someone.
I just think we've become so risk averse, haven't we, as
Yeah,
a society? This is the problem. It's how can we avoid risk? How can we've almost got like too good at problem solving, and that we're trying to avoid every single possible risk that there is. But
yeah,
actually, we need to take risks,
yeah,
um, in order to develop. It's like I say, coming back from Gran Canaria, and a lot of people have travel anxiety and they don't risk travel because they don't want to risk being stranded. And that's a risk that you take when you go on holiday. It's like a risk versus benefit kind of payoff. And when I came back last time, our flight was cancelled. We flew on the day of the global IT outage, and yeah, ended up. So I think it was 9 o'clock at night, and then all of a sudden the airport just emptied, and all flights were cancelled. And we were like, "Oh my god, what do we do?" We were exhausted. You know, we'd been in holiday mode for a week. Brain literally turned to mush, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, both of us are having to be like, "Right, God, what do we do?" and and that agility, we had to go from brain mush to, right, let's switch on, let's have conversations with people, let's get on our phones, let's figure out what the hell we're going to do so we can get back home. And kudos to our resilience. You know, we got back 24 hours later. We managed to stay in a hotel. We'd made a decision that we weren't going to wait for the Vueling flight, which was a week later. We had stuff to do. We needed to get home. And we were absolutely exhausted, trawling the internet, trying to look for flights. We found some flights. They were like 700 quid extra. And, you know, just having the resilience to go, yeah, you know what? Let's make the decision. Let's get home. Let's risk spending that money. We don't know if we're going to get that money back. We still don't know if we're going to get that money back. But we came home. We got home in the end. So I think everything that we're talking about today is kind of highlighted in that little moment of time, really. And there were other people there that were just sort of like waiting to see what was going to happen. And I just, that just didn't sit right with me, didn't sit right with my value system. And you know, a big value system of mine is productivity and just getting things done and moving forward. And, you know, it was an opportunity really to sort of almost like see what you're made of. And
And where did that resilience come from for you, would you say? Where is that from for you?
well, definitely my upbringing, you know, like you, it was installed into me. My dad, incredibly resilient. I'm just writing a speech actually for them at the moment for their anniversary, and just, you know, knockback after knockback after knockback. They would both actually, my parents, just get back up, dust themselves off. That real sense of positivity and hope, um, hope that things will change, a sense of optimism that things are going to be okay. And of course, in the face of adversity, you never really do know if something's going to be okay. You just
Mm,
have to trust
mm,
that it will. And a lot of the time, I think trust and faith is at the center of any moves that we make here. And I think it's, you know, you're kind of going into the unknown. And for me, trust really pulls me forward. And that's what I think, like, trust in the universe, trust that everything always works out in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. So you still got more work to do to get to the end. You know, looking back now, I can see how everything sort of resolved. And I
mm,
remember in my mind thinking, pardon me, thinking, I don't know how this is going to end. I don't know if we're going to get home. But my future self does know how it all works out, how it's all
right,
worked out. So that sort of knowing that there was a finished story out there in the future kind of pulled me
right.
forward a bit. Yeah. So let's talk. What I'd love to talk about with you is how why is resilience important, do you think, especially from a behavior change model? Why do we
Well,
need resilience?
well, you've just illustrated it with your story, your personal stories. It's resilience serves us in our everyday life, and arguably our everyday life involves change on both the micro and a macro scale. It's not just these big swooping changes that we might want to make in our lives, like, you know, a big change in diet or stopping smoking or undertaking some kind of exercise regime or a life change, like a move in some way or a relationship shift. It's not always the big things, it's the small things.
Right.
To be human is to evolve, hopefully, and evolution in and of itself is change. That's what evolution is. And actually, if
Mm,
you want to grow and grow while we're here and have self growth, then you're going to have to embrace change. And change as I've said so many times on the podcast, it's not hardwired into us. It's not, because it's not easy. It's just not easy. And so knowing that we're undertaking something that might feel quite foreign to us at times, and as you've illustrated with your personal stories, when we're encountering, going back to what you said at the start of the podcast, when you encounter hardship or challenge, your ability to adjust to that challenge, to recover from that challenge, to find agility within the challenge that you're facing is very, very important for not just that evolution and growth, but to give us a stable basis of mental health, to give us
Yes.
stable. So there's so much more around why resilience is important. Because
Yeah.
actually, when you don't have that, what's the opposite of not having resilience?
Anxiety, depression.
So there's a really good reason to build that muscle of resilience. And
Mm.
ironically, this is a bit meta, but in order to build it, you need to embrace change more and
Yes.
do things and seek things that actually challenge you. Because to build a muscle, you need to stress it.
So we need to
So
seek stress,
to seek,
basically.
opportunity to stress us, even if it's just, so going back to something that you and I both do. Of course, I'm going to wangle it into the conversation, but cold water immersion, that is building resilience, because
Absolutely.
you're stressing your system. And that's just
Yeah.
an example. But essentially,
That's
that's what you're doing within your body, is you're building that resilience over time.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it to the degree that, an expert would do it, for example. Cold
No.
water can actually start at like 20
Yes.
degrees,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it can, and a shower feels colder than going into a still body of water. So if you start with just a foot, or just
Mm.
immerse your hands in some cold water, that can be a nice sort of stressor for the body. And it's really, if we're thinking about a trauma informed perspective, if you're a highly traumatized person or you've got CPTSD, the a healing model for you will still be to stretch your window of tolerance, but you
Yeah.
do it with a degree that feels just a little stretch. You don't
Exactly.
want to go too far out, but it's still stretching, it's still exposure therapy. And for that, you still need resilience.
And it's the same with anything when it comes to behaviour change. You don't jump in at the deep end. You don't go and set yourself up for a marathon and run it on Saturday if you've never run before. Same with cold water. And just as a big disclaimer to anyone listening, obviously we're not promoting any particular thing that you should rush off and do. And if you do seek to do it, please get the help of someone who's expert in that area. And we're not professing to be that in all of the areas that we're discussing, but we're giving examples of things that highlight that kind of building of tolerance and resilience over time. So please seek the right help to do that. A bit of a bugbear of mine that that there are lots of experts out there, which we won't go into today. Um, but yeah,
Follow Serena on social media for
some more information and angry posts about that one. That's
oh
another
my
podcast
God.
altogether.
That's where
Um,
you need a bit of resilience, love, isn't it?
well, let's just not go down that one, because that's
Mm.
another story altogether.
Okay.
But yes, so to do it in small incremental steps that not necessarily feel easy for you, they feel doable but challenging, because you still need to create the challenge. It shouldn't be so easy that it's
Yeah.
you're coasting it, because that's not really building resilience either. So again,
Yeah.
we can use the same analogy when you're looking at muscle adaptation, which again, I'm not an expert in, but if you have any baseline understanding of building muscle and strength, you know that you have to lift a heavier weight than maybe feels entirely comfortable to start to build muscle. You shouldn't be able to do that for an hour. And if you're listening and you're not watching, you've just got a very light weight and just banding it around for 20 minutes. You
Yeah.
need some weight there to start to cause that stress.
I think I've got to a point actually where I quite like the feeling of discomfort sometimes. I mean, I've got to be in the right headspace for it, and sometimes I have to talk myself into it. But with any area of my life, physical, mental, and emotional, that feeling of discomfort, even things like having difficult conversations with people, I'm happier now that I sort of know myself better to have those slightly awkward, slightly more revealing emotional conversations that might sort of, especially with someone like yourself or someone who's got a good level of psychology. It's harder with people that don't have, because it can pick on your defenses. But yeah, I don't mind a bit of discomfort. How do you feel about discomfort?
Yeah, in fact, we've talked about this before. So I think, I've said before that building that muscle, you can come to quite enjoy the feeling of that, because actually you're growing. So what you realise is that from discomfort comes growth. You're growing,
Mm,
leaning into the growth. So it can become quite addictive. I think probably what we find as humans is, as we realise that we're attaining some level of mastery, we start to embrace the feeling of discomfort. You're right. There's a
yeah,
mastery that we're building, and we know that there's pleasure at the end of the pain. So I've talked about that pleasure pain principle before. It doesn't mean it translates easily always to other areas of your life, because there'll be areas that sometimes we find easier than others, depending on what we struggle with personally. But typically, what you find, certainly I find this in my work, and I always talk about this when it comes to change, is it's why change should also always be viewed holistically, because typically what you find is if you start to change in one area of your life, it's very difficult for it not to have a knock-on effect if you undertake it properly.
yeah.
It's usually now across the board. You can't look at one area of your life and look at growing in that area, and if you're doing the work, you're looking at yourself as a whole and complete person. So that's going to translate to all these other beautiful areas of your life. Like resilience, if you're finding that you're looking to build resilience in one area, it's likely it's going to start to translate into those other areas of your life. There's a really good reason to do it.
Yeah, and when I was looking into all the sort of cold water therapy research, there's that cross adaptation that happens, and I think
Mm,
there's some science behind that. When we expose ourselves to cold water and we build and develop resilience for the cold, we get
mm,
that cross adaptation that helps us to withstand stress in other
yeah,
areas of our lives as well. So it is quite interesting, and if you
very.
build and develop resilience in one area, it can map across. It's definitely worth
I mean,
doing.
totally, and this is so anecdotal, there is no research to back this, but maybe someone wants to go and actually do some research on it. I definitely find that, having done cold water swimming for it's going on, I guess, nearly 3 years now, um I have so getting into cold water is bloody hard. I
Yeah.
think when people do it, it looks easy. I don't make
E-
it look easy because I
Every
look really
fibre of your being is screaming
yeah,
no, and
don't
you
do
are
it.
doing something against
Yeah,
every fibre of your being. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So dipping under that icy cold water feels like utter madness. And actually, I'm lucky to share that experience with a friend, and we go to my local lake. And I often share a little video on social media of us. I've kind of stopped doing it lately. I've had a few people say, Are you still dipping?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am. I just have stopped showing it."
Mm.
Because it's, yeah, maybe it's like it's nothing really to do with what I do, but it kind of is, because it's actually linked to even what we're talking about now. But it's usually a time lapse thing. What you can't hear is the swearing.
I did wonder.
You can't hear me
Mm.
effing and blinding before I dip under the water. It looks all lovely and serene. I put some lovely tinkly tonky piano music on top. But I'm usually saying to Anna, "What the hell are we doing? This is crazy. And this is so cold. Is this as cold as it was last time?" So all this stuff is going on. But here's what I've learned. Not only do I feel amazing after, so it's going back to that, there's pleasure at the end of it, and I'm building resilience 100%. There's so many little lessons that I've learned from doing that I have taken into my life. So there's something about having to get into the water anyway. Like, and I don't want to get in, but I always get in and submerge before I feel ready. And I've definitely taken that little lesson very consciously into other areas where I'm very conscious of not waiting to feel ready to do the thing.
Yeah.
So I do it anyway. So if I know I want to do something, I know this is still very uncomfortable for me, I do it before I feel ready. Because
Yeah.
arguably that's going to hold me back from making the change I want. And I know that to be true.
There's something that happens in the heat of the moment, in that moment right there where you have to do the thing that you don't want to do, whether that's talking on a podcast or doing some public speaking or whatever it is, throwing yourself into it and watching yourself evolve and adapt and
Yeah.
overcome. I think that's the thing that really builds the resilience and the self-belief,
Yeah.
the belief in ourselves. And it makes me think about willpower as well, and the subject of willpower and that conscious will, which I think is a higher force that we all have that makes us do the thing that we don't want to do.
Yeah. I've always said I think willpower is overrated.
Do you? Tell me
Yeah.
more.
Because when you're looking at people making changes, willpower often comes into the conversation. People
Hmm.
say, well, oh, I don't know, he doesn't have any willpower or she doesn't have any willpower. It's like you're waiting for this thing. I'm not saying it's not there. It's like going back to the book that I recommended in a previous podcast, The War of Art.
Yeah.
Kind of waiting, people waiting for inspiration to hit before they
Or
just do.
motivation.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to get on with it. Like what? So waiting for it. I think that there are so many things that are contributing factors, and I think sometimes willpower becomes a bit of a red herring because someone who maybe struggles to change and can't make the change that they're seeking, it's unhelpful for them to slip into the narrative that other people have this thing called willpower that I don't have.
Hmm.
And so this will thing of willpower is all elusive because if you actually try and break it down, it becomes intangible. Like, what actually is it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's
Which
why
is why it's more like
starts.
you said, it's more like a force. I don't think it's necessarily something that you should seek from the outset. It's something that you tend to feel that you had retrospectively. You go, I must
Yeah.
have had some really good willpower. And that's also like having grit and determination and all those words that are a lot more tangible.
Yes, that's so
Mm,
true, and you see it in retrospect. So Stutz calls it a higher power. It's a force
right.
that we have to generate it within ourselves, in order. It's not something that we're given. It's not endowed on us. It's something that we have to, like love, for example. Love, we can
Yeah.
feel is given to us, right? We feel love when we look at an animal or our child or someone does something nice for us. We feel love, it's endowed upon us. But willpower is something that we have to generate.
Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, it's
Yeah,
good, isn't it? I love his
yeah.
book.
Kind of
Um,
where it feels very intuitive to me. I mean, I probably didn't describe it as eloquently as Stutz. I didn't know he said that. But I love that, yeah, I'm aligned with that way of thinking about it. It feels like something that arises out of action. It's not something that you can seek.
yeah.
It's like
And
looking for the golden fleece. It's like where are you going to get this thing? Actually, the golden
yeah.
fleece did exist, didn't it, in Greek mythology? But I mean, it's like it's intangible. It's not there. It's something that comes out of action.
Yeah, and it comes out of challenge too.
Yes.
So here, I actually wrote a quote from the
Ooh.
book.
Oh.
You can't You can't overcome the tendency to quit by thinking about not quitting. You need a higher force. We call that force willpower. It's the one higher force you must create yourself. All the universe can do is provide a challenge that demands you generate it.
Love it. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that,
And
Sally.
that's from his book, The Tools, which
Which
I
I've
highly
not,
recommend.
I've not fully read, but yeah.
Yeah, it's so good, and I love that because we're always trying to like avoid suffering, aren't we, in life? Like try and coddle ourselves to not feel suffering, but actually, so much comes out of it. So much good comes out of it. So much will, so much resilience and fortitude, and all of those lovely strong words come out
Mm,
of our challenge. Obviously, we don't want too much of it, but life is going to give us lemons.
Well, I was going to say, I think if you're just engaging in life, it will feel challenging, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Certainly feels like it now at this stage in my life. Um, yeah, it feels challenging. I think as you go through your life and chapters and seasons of your life, you are faced with, different challenges based on where you're at. Just quite literally, if you think about just aging in general, like
Yeah.
parents aging, health, what we do in terms of moving, family, all of those things that contribute to just being challenged. So, yeah, but also you're right that there are some challenges that we might want to seek as well. So you might want to set yourself actual challenges, and there are things that we can do. And maybe that's a lovely place to start wrapping up as well, is to think about these little challenges that you can bring into your everyday life if you're thinking about building resilience and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we do wrap things up, then,
Yeah.
are there any kind of reflective practices, any kind of homework exercises that we could give our listeners to help them reflect on resilience, maybe build resilience in their life?
Yeah, so one of the things I would say is, so thinking about just being you and what that looks like for you. So thinking about how you live your life day to day, what you probably notice is, like most humans, we live our life in a very routine way. So we live in that way that kind of shows that we live in that automatic bias. So we do things on autopilot a lot of the time. And so sometimes, unless you seek it and actively seek it, much of our life is on repeat. It's that routine. So in building resilience, you're looking at, can you create challenge for yourself? And that
Mm,
looks like a couple of things for me. It always looks like play, which I'm not going to mention here today, but definitely remember play. Play is a big one, and it feeds into resilience as well. But I would just say to think about embracing failure. So, what can you undertake where you are actively failing? And that will look like also breaking your routine. So, going back to kind of noticing your life and how you live it, just being really mindful of what that looks like for you on a daily basis. Where in your day can you start to break your routine, to bring something new in, to bring something really small but maybe challenging for you? So, it might even be just driving to work a different way, or choosing to go to a different coffee shops, and you'll be surprised at how you'll start to build that micro resilience around doing things differently. So that they're those kind of small things on a daily basis, but also you might want to think about undertaking some bigger things where breaking your routine and failure are potentially part of it. So you've talked about maybe doing 5 to K recently.
hmm
5K, five, what was it?
Couch to 5K.
5 to K. So things like that. So what challenge can you bring into your life where you're actively seeking failure and therefore building resilience as a part of that process?
Yeah, I always remember you telling me about that coffee shop thing years and years ago. Like, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. You came on and we did like a little video in my
Oh
Facebook
yeah.
group. Yeah, the Power Hour. And because it was all about anxiety. And that
Right.
was one of the things that you said is, and I
Good.
actually started doing that. And I do remember that because if ever I feel anxious, I always look at my life and think, you know what? I think it's because I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and my window of tolerance has just shrunk. Working from home and all of that.
Yeah.
So, so just like getting out the house and going somewhere different, like it sounds stupid, but just driving the other way or exploring
Yeah.
new roads. Like when I had Joey, I was always exploring new fields, new roads, new places to take him for a walk. And my God, it opened up so much, space around where I lived. And suddenly I saw where I lived as not being this tiny little flat, but as somewhere that was right in the middle of all this like amazing stuff. And it
I
started to
love
really open up
yeah.
my world.
I
Go
love
on.
that you said that. And no, thank you for bringing that to life, because I think on face value, it doesn't sound like it's part of the same conversation. It sounds really minor. What do you mean drive a different way to work, or get the bus instead of walk, or vice versa,
Mm,
or take a different route, or go to a different place? But what tends to happen as we age is our worlds do become smaller.
yeah.
That that is building less resilience over time. We tend to, if we're not careful, do less and rerun those paths that we've always run. This is obviously linking to building that neuroplasticity as well, which is something that it's really important that we do. And I certainly know people who are older, a lot older than us, but they only drive to particular houses and places because they know how to get there. But if they had to drive anywhere else, they would completely flip out.
Yeah.
And so you can see how just challenging yourself, there's no time like the present to get into the habit of doing things like that and bringing diversity into your life.
Yeah.
Doing new things to keep building that resilience over time, to be a resilient human. And it can look like those very small things.
And if we think about resilience as adaptation to change,
Yes.
then if we practice in change, if we wire in being okay with change, that's how we become more resilient. Just wanted to kind of make that clear, how those little changes actually serve resilience. Yeah.
It's all part of being resilient as a way to change and to keep evolving.
Yeah. Evolution.
Evolution.
Amazing. What a wonderful conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've loved this conversation, then do reach out to us. Let us know what else we can talk about and let us know what your biggest takeaways were.
Thank you, Sally, as always. And please send us your questions. We love them.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye. Great.
I like to see all those background things.
See that dark patch again, which you can't see, can you? I don't know. That could be some kind of health issue, though. What is that? Can you see?
Yeah, I can. I'm just trying to measure if I've got one as well. Cheers.
Rubbish smoothie today. I've got no berries, so it's like it tastes like cake mixture, which is quite nice.
Don't think so.
You don't. I've got a big.
Should we Google it? No, let's not do that. Don't Google fucking health conditions.
Form, darling.
Girl.
It's like cake mixture. It's vegan. Obviously, it's vegan. Protein powder.
Yeah.
A small handful of walnuts and almonds, some flaxseed, a banana.
Nice.
And lots of water, splash of oat milk. Cake mixture flavour smoothie.
Cake mixture smoothie. Yeah. Might try that. I won't tell you what's in my smoothie.
Is it collagen?
Probably all that shit, yeah.
All that shit.
All that shit.